The rain pelted against the glass ceiling of the Arius Arbitration Hall, each drop sliding down the curved panels like tiny comets burning across a cold void. Inside, the air was tense, charged with the static energy of conflict, not of war, but of something more insidious. Bureaucracy. Ryla Voss stood rigid in the center of the chamber, her uniform crisp, her fists clenched behind her back. The emblem of the Galactic Judiciary still gleamed on her chest, though by the end of this hearing, she knew it would be stripped from her. She had spent years climbing the ranks, dedicating herself to the pursuit of justice across the known sectors. And now, all of it was crumbling. At the tribunal's raised bench, 3 arbitrators loomed, their robes black as the void. Their gazes were impassive, coldly efficient, like data processing units assessing a faulty algorithm. The evidence is clear, the central arbitrator droned, his voice devoid of warmth. You directly defied institutional policy by interfering in a matter deemed beyond the jurisdiction of the Galactic Judiciary. The case involved an asset of no legal standing. Not an asset, Ryla cut in, her voice sharp, almost pleading. A veteran, a living being. The central arbitrator barely acknowledged her outburst. A Class 4 retired war creature holds no citizen status under current law. A dragon, even one with past military service, is not protected under judicial intervention. Ryla's jaw tightened. They called it a war creature, as if it were some disposable machine. The truth was far from that. The dragon in question, Drinker, had served the Galactic Fleet for decades. He had been bred for war, honed in battle, his scales carrying the scars of planetary conflicts that most humans wouldn't dare imagine. And now, abandoned by the very forces that had once commanded him, he was being sold like surplus scrap to a corporate conglomerate for experimentation. She had tried to stop it, and now she was the one on trial. One of the other arbitrators, a wiry reptilian from the Vathari species, adjusted their optical visor. Your defense is insufficient, Voss. You had neither legal claim nor formal authority to intervene in the proceedings of Imperial salvage and acquisitions. So the law serves them, not the people's? Ryla shot back. The law serves order. The arbitrator's words were final. Your actions have deemed you unfit for duty. Effective immediately. You are relieved of your position within the judiciary. The words hit like a kinetic round to the gut. She had known this was coming, but hearing it aloud sent a cold rush through her veins. Her career, her life's work gone. They didn't even give her the dignity of responding. The arbitrators stood, their verdict delivered. The chamber doors hissed open, and 2 security officers stepped forward. One reached for the judiciary badge pinned to her chest. Ryla exhaled sharply. With slow precision, she unfastened the emblem herself and placed it on the nearest podium. She turned and walked out, the echo of her boots swallowed by the sound of the relentless rain. The world outside was a blur of neon and cold steel. The judicial district of Arius Prime was a towering metropolis, its spires clawing at the storm-lit sky. Transports hovered in strict lanes above, the glow of their engines casting spectral light over the soaked walkways. Ryla's breath curled in the damp air as she stood at the edge of a landing platform, staring out over the city. She had no destination, no purpose. Only the hollow ache of injustice gnawed at her. She should have fought harder. She should have done more. A deep, resonant voice rumbled from the shadows. You did more than anyone else would have. She turned sharply. At first, he was just a silhouette against the city lights. Massive, wings partially unfurled, the ridges of his scaled body glistening with rain. But as he stepped forward, his golden eyes burned with quiet intensity. Drinker, you shouldn't be here, she muttered. Neither should you, he countered. She let out a breathless, bitter laugh. Yeah, funny how that works. The dragon studied her, his gaze measuring something beyond words. He was old, not in the way humans were, but in a way that stretched across centuries. His kind had fought alongside soldiers, had bled in wars that reshaped star systems. And now, they were cast aside like relics. Where are you going now? He asked. I don't know, she admitted. Drinker rumbled deep in his chest, an almost thoughtful sound. Then perhaps it's time to stop following their rules. Ryla met his gaze. There was something dangerous in his words, something unspoken but heavy with possibility. Before she could respond, the quiet chime of an incoming transmission echoed from the personal device embedded in her wrist. A priority alert. Her brows furrowed. That's impossible. She tapped the interface, and the holographic display flared to life. The insignia that appeared made her heart stop. It was the seal of the Galactic Command, and beneath it, a simple message. Commander Avon Cross en route to your location. Stand by. She stared at the display, her mind racing. Why would the highest-ranking officer in the fleet be coming for her? 1 hour ago, she had been cast aside. Now, the most powerful man in the galaxy was on his way. Ryla looked up at Drinker, uncertainty warring with adrenaline in her veins. This just got interesting, she murmured, and for the first time that night, the dragon bared his teeth in something that was almost a smile. The storm had only grown worse. Lightning slashed across the sky in jagged lines, illuminating the towering cityscape of Arius Prime. The rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the metal streets into rivers of flickering neon reflections. Ryla Voss barely noticed. She stood on the edge of the landing platform, staring at the priority alert hovering over her wrist display. Commander Avon Cross en route to your location. Stand by. Her mind raced. The Galactic Command didn't just send priority transmissions lightly. And Avon Cross wasn't just some bureaucrat in a polished uniform. He was one of the most powerful figures in the fleet, a living legend in military circles. If he was coming here personally, it wasn't for a friendly conversation. Drinker shifted beside her, his great wings folding tighter against his rain-slick scales. The commander himself, he rumbled, his voice unreadable. That is unexpected. Ryla clenched her jaw. That makes 2 of us? A sharp gust of wind swept across the landing platform, sending rain lashing against her face. A dull hum vibrated through the air, growing in intensity. Then she saw it, descending through the storm, a sleek, black-wrapped shuttle cut through the night like a predator. It bore no identifying fleet markings, only the subtle sheen of reinforced military plating. It was a ship designed for covert operations, not diplomatic visits. Ryla's stomach tightened. This wasn't just an inquiry. As the shuttle touched down, the landing struts hissed against the rain-slick platform. The side hatch disengaged with a soft click, and the ramp extended. Avon Cross stepped into the storm. He was a tall man, his presence sharp as a blade. His navy blue command coat was lined with platinum trim, but there was no ostentation in the way he wore it. Only disciplined precision. His gaze was calculating, cutting through the darkness like a targeting system locking on. Despite the rain soaking through his uniform, he moved like it didn't touch him. Behind him, 2 figures flanked his sides, security officers clad in black combat armor, their visors obscuring their faces. Their weapons remained holstered, but the tension in their posture told Ryla everything she needed to know. This was not a casual meeting. She forced her spine straight as Cross approached. She would not cower. Ryla Voss. His voice was steady level. You've caused quite a disturbance. She didn't flinch. I did my job. Your job was to uphold the law. Cross's gaze flicked toward Drinker. Instead, you interfered in a classified asset transfer. An asset? Ryla's fists clenched. Is that what we're calling war veterans now? Scrap for corporations to pick apart? Cross studied her for a long moment. The storm howled around them, but his expression didn't waver. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, his shoulders shifting ever so slightly. You don't understand the stakes. Ryla scoffed. Then explain them to me. Cross glanced at the 2 guards. Leave us. The officers hesitated but obeyed, stepping back toward the shuttle. Only then did Cross take another step forward, lowering his voice just enough to be heard over the wind. Imperial Salvage and Acquisitions wasn't just buying an old war creature, he said. They were buying something much bigger, something dangerous. Drinker let out a low growl. You speak as if I'm a weapon still in service. Cross turned his gaze to the dragon. Unreadable. Aren't you? Ryla felt a pulse of anger behind her ribs. Drinker is a veteran. He earned the right to live freely. Cross's jaw tensed. The world doesn't work that way, Voss. The things he knows, things that were locked away after the War of the Broken Suns, aren't just going to disappear because we want them to. The word sent a slow chill through Ryla's spine. She had assumed Imperial Salvage and Acquisitions had wanted Drinker for experimentation, for bioweapon research. But this sounded worse. Explain, she demanded. Cross studied her, debating something. Then, he reached into his coat and retrieved a small, black data drive. He held it between two fingers. This contains classified records. Information about the Drinker Initiative. Drinker's body tensed, his wings shifting slightly. Ryla frowned. Drinker Initiative? Cross's voice was quiet, but firm. He wasn't just any war dragon. He was part of the last protocol. A beat of silence. The storm raged around them, but everything else felt still. Ryla had heard whispers of the last protocol before. A rumored failsafe, designed at the height of the war, meant to end conflicts before they could even begin. But the details had been wiped from every record. Every inquiry into it had led to dead ends. And now Cross was implying that Drinker had been part of it. Her breath came sharp. You're saying, I'm saying, Cross cut in, that there are factions out there who would kill for what's in his mind. The things he was programmed to do. Drinker's golden eyes burned with something ancient, something guarded. You assume I would share such knowledge freely. Cross's expression darkened. I assume you wouldn't have a choice if the wrong people got their hands on you. The words sent a shiver down Ryla's spine. She had thought she was fighting against corporate greed, against the cold indifference of bureaucracy. But this was bigger. Why are you telling us this? She asked slowly. Cross was silent for a long moment. Then, he held out the data drive. Because the people coming for him won't stop. And because I don't trust my own superiors to make the right call. Ryla hesitated, but she reached for the drive. The moment her fingers closed around it, the platform security alarms blared. A new sound split the storm, a high-pitched mechanical whine. She turned sharply. Above them, dark silhouettes cut through the rain. Not fleet vessels. Not corporate security. These were black market hunter ships, moving fast, their weapons primed. The air cracked with the first pulse of energy fire. Cross's eyes went cold. They're here? Ryla barely had time to curse before the platform erupted into chaos. The first plasma blast struck the platform's outer railing, sending molten metal spraying through the rain. The impact sent a tremor through the structure, knocking Ryla off balance. She barely managed to steady herself before another explosion tore into the deck, sending sparks and debris flying. The hunter ships descended fast, black silhouettes against the storm. They weren't ordinary mercenary vessels. Ryla could tell that much from their aggressive formation and the eerie silence of their engines. These were assassins, professionals. No warning shots, no demands. Just cold efficiency. They're here to kill us. Move! Cross barked, drawing his sidearm in a single fluid motion. Ryla reacted on instinct, grabbing Drinker's harness and pulling him back toward the hangar entrance. The old war dragon needed no urging. His great wings snapped open, catching the wind as he surged toward cover. Cross followed, his pistol barking sharp pulses of plasma toward the descending ships. The enemy ships returned fire. A searing blast tore through the air just inches from Ryla's head, striking the control terminal behind her. The explosion sent a shockwave through her bones, and she hit the deck hard, the impact rattling her ribs. Ryla! Drinker's voice cut through the chaos, deep and urgent. I'm fine, she gritted out, scrambling to her feet. Her heart pounded as she scanned the platform. The hunter ships had landed, their doors sliding open. Shadows spilled out, figures in sleek, black combat armor, their faces hidden behind opaque visors. Not corporate security, not standard mercenaries. Kill teams. One of the armored figures raised a rifle, aiming directly at Cross. Ryla didn't think. She moved. Her pulse spiked as she dove toward Cross, slamming into him just as the assassin fired. The plasma round sizzled through the air where his head had been a second earlier, striking the rain-slick metal instead. They hit the ground hard. Cross grunted beneath her, his weapon skidding out of reach. Ryla twisted, drawing her own sidearm, just in time to see another enemy raising their weapon. And then Drinker moved. The old dragon roared, and the sheer force of it shook the air. It was a terrible, primal sound, the kind that belonged to a different era, an era where creatures like him had been the gods of the battlefield. Drinker surged forward, his massive form nothing but a blur of golden-scaled fury. His claws ripped through the nearest assassin, sending armored pieces scattering across the deck. The others pivoted instantly, weapons rising to counter him. But they weren't fast enough. Drinker's tail whipped out, catching one soldier in the chest and sending them flying into the side of the landed hunter's ship with a sickening crunch. Another raised a shock spear, but Drinker's jaws snapped shut around it, shattering the weapon before crushing the soldier behind it. The remaining assassins fell back, regrouping. They weren't untrained. They had protocols for dealing with war creatures. But they weren't fighting just any war creature. They were fighting Drinker of the last protocol. Ryla grabbed Cross's arm and hauled him up. He didn't argue. He moved with her, his jaw tight, his expression cold and calculating. "They won't stop," he said over the chaos. "They were waiting for us. They planned this." Ryla's blood ran cold. "They knew you'd give me the drive." Cross's silence was confirmation enough. Drinker landed beside them, his chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. "We must go," he rumbled. Ryla nodded, gripping the data drive tight. "We need a ship." "That's not an option," Cross snapped. "They'll track any vessel we take. The moment we launch, they'll blow us out of the sky. Then what do you suggest?" Cross exhaled sharply, scanning their surroundings. His gaze flicked to the maintenance lifts at the far end of the platform, the ones leading into the lower industrial levels of Arius Prime. "We go down," he said. Ryla hesitated. "Into the underbelly? You have a better plan?" She didn't. "Fine," she bit out. "But we better move because—" A sudden whine filled the air. A new ship descended through the storm. But this one was different. It was larger than the hunter vessels, heavier, with a thick, plated hull. And it bore a symbol Ryla hadn't seen in years. A mark she had assumed had been erased from history. The insignia of the last protocol. Her pulse stopped. Cross swore under his breath. "No, no, this isn't possible." The ship's side bay opened, and from within the darkness, a figure stepped forward. Not a soldier, not a mercenary, something far worse. A massive humanoid, clad in segmented, matte black armor, its helmet featureless except for a single, vertical crimson visor. The armor bore no insignia, no rank markings. Only the number 7 engraved into the plating over its chest. A protocol enforcer. The ghosts of the old war. Drinker stiffened, his tail lashing against the platform. "Impossible," he murmured. "They were decommissioned. Destroyed." The enforcer moved forward with slow, deliberate steps, unfazed by the rain, by the carnage, by the weapons still primed in the hands of assassins. It stopped a few feet away, tilting its head ever so slightly as if studying them. Then, in a voice like crushed metal and echoes of war, it spoke. "Drinker, last of the protocol, you are hereby recalled." Ryla's blood turned to ice. Drinker's wings unfurled slightly, but he didn't move. His golden eyes locked onto the enforcer. "I am no longer bound to your chains." The enforcer was silent for a long, terrible moment. Then it raised its arm. A soft click echoed through the storm. Ryla barely had time to react before a pulse of black energy shot from the enforcer's wrist module, striking Drinker square in the chest. The dragon roared, not in rage but in pain. A deep, guttural sound tore from his throat as his massive form collapsed, his wings twitching, his claws digging into the deck. His body convulsed, golden scales flickering as some kind of neural override, seized through him. Ryla screamed, "Drinker!" The enforcer's visor glowed brighter. "Stand down. Return to service." Drinker struggled, but his movements were sluggish, unnatural, as if something was hijacking his body. His breathing came ragged, his muscles locking. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a command, a failsafe. Ryla felt the horror slam into her chest. They had never just wanted to capture him. They had wanted to reactivate him. Cross moved, snapping his weapon up, but before he could fire, the Enforcer's head snapped toward him. And in an instant, it was already moving. Faster than anything that size had a right to be. It was on them before Ryla could even scream. Ryla's pulse pounded in her ears as the Enforcer moved with impossible speed, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Cross barely had time to fire before the black-armored Titan's arm lashed out, striking him with bone-shattering force. The impact sent Cross flying. His body slammed into the side of a cargo container with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Ryla barely had time to scream before the Enforcer turned its featureless gaze back toward her. She scrambled back, her boots slipping on the rain-slick metal. Her heart thundered in her chest. Drinker lay collapsed beside her, his great body trembling, his golden eyes flickering between rage and helplessness. The pulse of black energy that had struck him still hummed, like an invisible chain wrapped around his mind, holding him prisoner. The Enforcer took another step forward. Dragon Unit Drinker, you are an asset of the last protocol. You will comply. Drinker let out a ragged snarl, his claws digging furrows into the platform. He fought against the override, his body tensing against the unseen force. But the tremors in his limbs only grew worse. They weren't just stopping him. They were rewriting him. Ryla's breath caught. She could see it, his golden eyes flickering darker, his muscles twitching in wrong patterns, his body locking into old, rigid formations. The protocols buried deep in his neural architecture, the ones he had fought so hard to break free from, they were coming back. They were taking him. No, she whispered, terror curling around her ribs. No, no, no. Remain calm, civilian, the Enforcer intoned, its voice like cold steel. This matter does not concern you. Ryla's hand tightened around the data drive in her palm, the one Cross had given her, the one he had risked his life to steal. This wasn't just about Drinker. This wasn't just about her. It was about whatever the hell was on this drive. Something big. Something the protocol wanted buried. Something worth reawakening their most dangerous, most powerful war asset. Drinker wasn't just a veteran. He was a weapon, one they weren't willing to let go. Don't let them take me. The voice was barely a whisper, but it slammed into Ryla like a thunderclap. Drinker. She whipped toward him, her heart shattering at what she saw. His wings trembled, his great golden body locked in a violent tremor, his tail thrashing wildly in agony. His eyes, those proud, ancient eyes, flickered between gold and black, the override tearing into his mind like a parasite. She could see him losing himself, falling. The Enforcer raised its arm again, its visor pulsing with raw authority. Obey. Ryla moved. She lunged toward Drinker, pressing her forehead against his massive, trembling snout, her hands gripping his scales tight. Drinker, listen to me, she screamed over the storm, her voice raw, desperate. You are not their weapon. You are not their asset. You are a free being. Drinker's entire body shook. His breath came ragged, torn between the chains of the past and the woman screaming at him now. The Enforcer stepped forward, its crimson visor flaring. Unit Drinker, you are not permitted to engage in independent thought. Return to... Shut the hell up. Ryla whirled toward the armored Titan, her gun already raised. She fired. The plasma slammed into the Enforcer's chest, an instant before the Titan snatched the bolt out of the air with its bare hand. Ryla's breath hitched. The Enforcer crushed the still-burning plasma in its palm, letting the smoldering embers fall to the platform. Hostile action detected. Engaging. Then it moved. It was on her in an instant, its massive hand lashing out, aiming for her throat. Ryla didn't even have time to think. 1 second, the Enforcer's grip was inches from crushing her windpipe. The next, the world exploded in a blur of gold and fury. Drinker moved. The override wasn't fully broken, not yet. His body still twitched, still shuddered under its grip. But his will had broken free. His rage had broken free. The great war dragon lashed out, his massive talons slamming into the Enforcer's side with enough force to send the Titan flying. The black-armored behemoth crashed into the side of the hunter ship with a deafening boom, denting the hull. Ryla barely had time to react before Drinker turned, his great body shifting with barely contained fury. His breath came ragged, his muscles taut with war-forged instinct. But his eyes were gold again. He was free. Ryla let out a shuddering breath, her heart racing. Then the Enforcer stood up, armor-dented, one arm dislocated, red energy leaking from its fractured plating, but still standing, still moving. Drinker snarled. Ryla's pulse spiked, until suddenly a new sound split the air. The distinct, piercing screech of incoming warships. Drinker's massive head snapped upward. His golden eyes widened. Ryla turned just in time to see a massive fleet descending through the storm. But they weren't hunter ships. They weren't mercenaries. These ships bore the banner of the Galactic Commander. And at the lead of the formation, a flagship larger than anything Ryla had ever seen. The Enforcer hesitated. For the first time it hesitated. Then a voice thundered through the air, crackling through the comms like a war drum. A voice that sent chills down Ryla's spine. Stand down. By order of the Galactic Commander. The Enforcer didn't move. Then, after a long, terrible moment, it lowered its arm. Ryla sucked in a sharp breath, her entire body still wired for battle. But the fight was over. For now. As the warships descended, as the rain pounded against the platform, as Drinker's breathing slowed beside her, Ryla knew one thing for certain. Everything had just changed. The wind howled across the landing platform as the Galactic Commander's flagship touched down, its engines kicking up a storm of rain and debris. The hunter ships that had once threatened Ryla and Drinker now hovered in motionless silence, their pilots unwilling to make any sudden moves. Ryla's heart still thundered in her chest, her hands trembling as she gripped the data drive tightly. Cross was still unconscious on the ground, his breathing shallow but steady. Drinker stood beside her, his great golden form wounded but unbroken, his wings folded protectively around her. The Enforcer remained frozen, its crimson visor flickering as if caught between conflicting orders. Then the hatch of the flagship opened. A tall figure stepped out, their silhouette stark against the ship's brilliant interior lights. The wind caught the flowing naval officer's coat, making it billow like a battle banner. Their boots struck the metal platform with deliberate, controlled precision. Ryla's breath hitched. Everyone in the galaxy knew that uniform. The dark blue insignia, the rows of commendations, the rigid posture of someone who commanded entire war fleets with a mere word. This was High Commander Vetra Solanis, supreme authority of galactic fleet operations. And judging by the fire in her piercing silver eyes, she was not happy. What in the name of every celestial body is happening here? Vetra's voice was like a whip crack through the storm. The Enforcer twitched, then turned to face her. Commander, this unit was conducting a sanctioned retrieval operation. The target, Dragon Unit Drinker, belongs to the last protocol. Belongs? Vetra's gaze turned to the Enforcer, sharp as a blade. You would do well to rethink your words. The Enforcer hesitated. Ryla's pulse spiked. This was her chance. She stepped forward, forcing herself to stand tall despite the ache in her limbs. High Commander, she said, her voice hoarse but determined. She held up the data drive. This isn't just about Drinker. The last protocol isn't just recalling retired war assets. They're reprogramming them, enslaving them. And I have the proof. Vetra's silver eyes locked onto the drive, and for a moment, the storm seemed to still. Explain? Ryla swallowed, forcing herself to ignore the weight of every soldier, mercenary, and enforcer watching her. She didn't care. Drinker had risked everything for his freedom. She wasn't about to let him lose it now. 3 years ago, she began, the Council officially decommissioned the last protocol. They said the war assets, like Drinker, were given full autonomy. But that was a lie. She glared at the Enforcer. They're using classified override programs to force these veterans back into service. They strip their memories, rewrite their thoughts, turn them back into weapons. Vetra's expression darkened. You have proof of this? Ryla lifted the drive. Everything's on here. Cross stole it from a Last Protocol archive before that thing nearly killed him for it. Vetra stepped forward, taking the drive from Ryla's outstretched hand. For a long moment, she studied it, then turned back to the Enforcer. Is this true? The Enforcer remained motionless. Then, after a long silence, affirmative. A ripple of shock went through the surrounding soldiers. Even the hunter pilots flinched at the admission. Vetra's jaw tightened. On whose orders? High Command of the Last Protocol. The directive was reactivated under Article Theta 1 of the Emergency War Asset Clause. Vetra's hands curled into fists. That clause was revoked 3 years ago, she said, her voice deadly calm. Correct. However, certain officials deemed it necessary to override the decision in the event of future galactic conflict. A cold realization settled over Ryla. They had never intended to let the dragons go free. Not truly. Drinker had never been safe. None of them had. Vetra turned sharply to one of her officers. Secure that Enforcer for immediate decommissioning. I want a full audit on every standing member of the Last Protocol Initiative. If they're still operating in the shadows, we are ending it today. The soldiers moved instantly, surrounding the Enforcer with high-powered disruption rifles. The black-armored Titan did not resist as its systems were forcibly shut down. Ryla let out a shuddering breath. It was over. The Last Protocol's corruption had been exposed. The war-forged veterans were finally free. Drinker let out a low rumble, shifting his wings as if shaking off centuries of chains. He turned his great golden head toward Ryla, his ancient eyes filled with something she had never seen before. Hope. Vetra regarded them both for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she extended a hand. You risked everything to uncover this truth, she said, and you saved a war hero in the process. The Galactic Council owes you a great debt. Ryla blinked, momentarily stunned. Then she grasped the commander's hand, her grip firm. I just did what was right, she said. Vetra's gaze softened. That's what makes all the difference. As the soldiers escorted the disabled Enforcer away, as the hunter ships were forced into retreat, as the storm finally began to clear, Ryla knew her fight was far from over. The Last Protocol might have been exposed, but there were still questions. Who had given the order? How many other dragons were still trapped? And if the Last Protocol had been willing to break galactic law for this, what else were they hiding? She glanced up at Drinker, and the great dragon met her gaze. She could see the unspoken answer in his eyes. They weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. And this time, they would fight together. The Galactic Council's investigation into the Last Protocol initiative lasted for months. What they uncovered shook the foundations of interstellar governance. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had imagined. High-ranking officials, shadow corporations, even private militaries had their hands in the illegal reclamation of war-forged dragons. Some of the veterans had already been stripped of their identities, forced back into battles they had no memory of agreeing to. Others had been secretly sold to warlords, crime syndicates, or worse, executed as a liability to prevent them from regaining control. The galaxy recoiled at the revelations. Public outrage spread like a wildfire across star systems. Protests erupted on core worlds and fringe colonies alike, demanding justice for the betrayed veterans. Governments scrambled to issue reparations, trying to salvage their reputations. The Galactic Council officially dissolved the Last Protocol Initiative, declaring it an act of war against sentient beings. Trials and arrests followed. But Ryla knew it wasn't over. Erasing a name from history didn't mean the threat was gone. Someone had set this in motion. Someone powerful enough to bend the rules of war, rewrite laws in the dark, and keep entire fleets of deadly, obedient dragons at their beck and call. And that someone was still out there. The wind swept through the city of Etheron Prime, tugging at Ryla's coat as she stood atop the docking tower, watching Drinker adjust the modifications on his new flight harness. A free dragon. The thought still felt unreal. Not an asset, not a tool, not a war beast to be recalled and discarded at the whim of bureaucrats. Drinker had spent decades in service. His kind had been built for war, their entire existence tied to conflict. And yet, When he was finally given a choice, he had chosen something no one expected. He had chosen to live, and now so had many others. Across the galaxy, the surviving war-forged dragons were awakening from their forced servitude, reclaiming their memories, their lives. Some remained in hiding, uncertain of a world that had forgotten them. Others sought justice, hunting down the remnants of a shadow project that had enslaved them. Drinker, however, had made his choice clear. He would fight, not for a government, not for a council, not for anyone who saw him as expendable. He would fight for those like him, for those still trapped, for those who deserved freedom but had never known it. And Ryla? She had a choice to make too. She could have gone back to her old life, found another job, let the galaxy's problems become someone else's fight. But how could she? Not after everything she had seen. Not after everything she had lost and gained. Not after Cross. Her throat tightened as she glanced at the comms panel on her wrist. Cross was still in a med-stasis chamber, recovering from his wounds. The medics said he'd be fine, but the battle had left scars deeper than the physical. When he woke up, he'd have questions, and Ryla had no intention of leaving him behind. Drinker let out a low rumble, drawing her attention. "The harness checks out," he said, flexing his wings. "But it's going to take time to adjust. I've never flown without commands before." Ryla folded her arms, tilting her head. "Well, you better get used to it, because from now on, you fly on your own terms." Drinker met her gaze, his ancient eyes steady. "I will," he said. Then, after a pause, "And you? What's next for you, human?" Ryla turned her eyes to the distant skyline, where the stars were beginning to peek through the atmosphere. A week ago, she had lost her job defending a dragon no one cared about. Now the Galactic Council owed her a favor, and she intended to use it. "There's still unfinished business," she said. Whoever orchestrated the last protocol initiative wasn't just some rogue faction. It was organized, funded. Someone high up was pulling the strings. Drinker's tail flicked, his talons tightening against the platform. "And you plan to find them?" Ryla nodded. "Not just find them." Her voice was cold steel. "I plan to bring them down." For a long moment, Drinker simply studied her. Then, with a deep exhale, he turned his gaze toward the horizon. "Then it seems our war isn't over," he said. A hum echoed from Ryla's wrist. A transmission. She glanced at the identifier. Her pulse spiked. It was Commander Vetra Solanis. Ryla exchanged a look with Drinker before tapping the receiver. "Ryla Farrow." The commander's voice came through, crisp and controlled. "We need to talk?" "Let me guess," Ryla said, watching the distant patrol ships move in tight formations over the city. "You found something." A pause. "Then, you could say that. We traced the funding channels for the last protocol initiative. Someone was laundering military contracts through private sectors to keep it off official records." Ryla's grip tightened. "Who?" A longer pause. Then Vetra said two words that changed everything. "The Helios Syndicate." Ryla's breath stilled. The Helios Syndicate, a criminal empire so powerful it had its claws in every major industry, from corporate espionage to illegal arms manufacturing. If they had been funding the last protocol initiative, if they had been the ones pulling the strings, then this went beyond corrupt military officials. This was a war waiting to happen. Drinker let out a low growl, his wings shifting in agitation. "We're going after them," he said. It wasn't a question. Ryla nodded slowly. "Oh yeah," she muttered. "We're going after them." Vetra's voice remained calm, but Ryla could hear the weight behind her words. "If you choose this fight, you won't have the council to protect you," she warned. "The Helios Syndicate doesn't leave loose ends. They will come for you." Ryla exhaled sharply. "Then I guess we'd better make the first move." A silence stretched between them. Then Vetra let out a slow, approving breath. "I'll send you the data package," she said. "You'll need allies. Be careful, Pharaoh." The transmission ended. Ryla lowered her wrist. The wind howled around them, carrying the scent of change, of war, of something inevitable. She turned to Drinker. The great dragon's golden eyes burned with a new purpose. "You realize what this means, right?" she said. Drinker grinned, baring fangs meant for battle. "It means," he rumbled. That the galaxy isn't ready for us. Ryla smirked. Good. She stepped forward. One step, then another, until she stood at the very edge of the docking tower, the vast, endless sky stretching before her. Drinker unfurled his wings, and together, they jumped. The future awaited, and the war was just beginning.